This never happened to the other fella.
I wouldn't be too hard on yourself, mate. I mean, this happened to the other fella. Hey people, my name's Jim and welcome back to My Movie Obsession, a place for reviews and rankings, geeky discussion and nostalgia. And as my regular viewers know, I've been ranking each of the James Bond actors' movies worst to best to eventually complete my quest of discovering what is my favourite James Bond film of all time, because it's undecided. But that's actually going to be the next video after this, because George Lazenby, he only did one James Bond film, so obviously I couldn't rank his films, because by definition, On Her Majesty's Secret Service is the best George Lazenby James Bond film. But luckily enough, it is one of the best James Bond films in the series anyway, so I thought I'd devote a video to talking about George Lazenby, the man who only played James Bond once in one movie, and then in the next video I'm actually going to be ranking all my number ones to try and determine what is my favourite. So let's look back at George Lazenby in his only effort as James Bond in 1969's On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Let's do this. In 1967, after 5 films, Sean Connery resigned from the role of James Bond. The actors up to replace him were Englishman John Richardson, Dutchman Hans de Vries, Australian Robert Campbell, Englishman Anthony Rogers and Australian George Lazenby. Timothy Dalton was also offered the part of Bond, but he turned it down, feeling that at 22 he was too young and relatively inexperienced to take the role. Dalton went on to play Bond in The Living Daylights in 1987 and License to Kill in 1989. Adam West, Batman himself, a personal friend of producer Albert R. Broccoli, was offered the part of Bond. West said that while he was very tempted, he ultimately turned it down, feeling the role should be played by an English actor.
He gave his life for ours.
Now the movie tells the story of George Lazenby's Bond on the trail of criminal mastermind Blofeld, who he of course met in You Only Live Twice, who was played by Donald Pleasence, now played by Telly Savalas. And Bond is on his trail as he's posing under an assumed identity, training up a cult of crazy females, it seems. We'll get to that later. So Bond is pursuing him, but at the same time he's also becomes exposed to this very unique woman who he begins a relationship with, Tracy, played by Diana Rigg. And she is a very unique woman. I mean, this movie begins with Bond rescuing her from committing suicide. Quite ambitious for the James Bond series. Like, we had never seen anything like this before. Bond rescues Tracy from committing suicide, like mental health issues on screen in 1969. Crazy. And it also gives Tracy an added dimension to her. She's unlike any Bond girl we've ever seen, and she presents a new kind of emotional relationship for James Bond, because Bond has to deal with a world he's never experienced. Usually women just fall into his arms. This one is a little more intriguing. This one's got more going on. This one's actually got something for James Bond to emotionally relate to and try and work out. It's a fascinating relationship they have early on, where Bond's trying to help her, she's resisting, and he's kind of got this strange relationship that he's never had before that intrigues him, I guess. Peter Hunt, who had worked on editing for the 5 previous films, had impressed Broccoli enough to earn his directional debut, as they believed his quick cutting had set the style for the series. Broccoli and Hunt eventually chose George Lazenby after seeing him in a Fry's chocolate cream advertisement. They were impressed by his swagger and also believed he looked tough enough that he could carry himself in action scenes.
My name's Bond. James Bond.
Now George Lazenby, I think, is great in the role. As a kid, I always brought him as James Bond. Like, as soon as he was on screen, I brought it. I brought that he was James Bond. Obviously Sean Connery had established this worldwide, mega known character. So for a guy who had only previously been a model to come in, take on one of the biggest roles on the planet, and take all that on his shoulders is very admirable for George Lazenby. And I feel like people kind of resented him back at the time, but these days he's kind of getting a resurgence in popularity. I feel like he brings more to the role. He kind of does like a Sean Connery imitation in moments, and I understand why he does it. And I do think he has that aggression of Sean Connery. You can buy him as a tough guy, you can buy him as an agent, but he adds a human dimension of vulnerability to Bond. And that is in part due to his relationship with Tracy. It's kind of a relationship dynamic you've never had before. so it kind of brings Bond down to earth a bit. But you have to tip your hat to George Lazenby for bringing in his own uncertainty of taking the role, not being this gigantic actor, and kind of bringing it into James Bond, bringing that human element. Obviously, he's not as good an actor as Sean Connery, but he's a good actor in different ways to Sean Connery. I feel like Sean Connery wouldn't have looked right playing the emotional scenes as Bond opens up to Tracy and genuinely falls in love. I feel like Sean Connery's Bond was quite guarded. I really think George Lazenby should have done more movies. I genuinely do. I feel like he would have settled into the role a bit more. Here he's kind of wide-eyed and kind of seems like he's really enjoying himself on screen. He doesn't come across as nervous. He comes across, as, like I said, as wide-eyed, like fascinated with it all. And I feel like if he'd have carried on, he would have established himself in the role. George Lazenby was offered a contract for 7 films. However, he was convinced by his agent, Ronan O'Reilly, that the secret agent would be obsolete in the 1970s, and as a result he left the series after the release of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I've got 2 words for that agent. Now the hilarious thing in this film is that Tracy's father decides, out of all the men in the world, that he wants Tracy to marry James Bond. Was Henry VIII not available? The worst candidate for a husband you can get. And Bond even says that. He's trying to convince him to marry her. And Bond's like, I'm a bachelor, I can't do that. My job also allows that I don't do that. He really wants him to marry Tracy. But obviously then Bond starts getting to know Tracy. And you realise that James Bond could actually be a husband figure. He could be a husband. He opens up to Tracy. You see that this woman mellows him in a lot of ways. So James Bond actually becomes somewhat of a good candidate for a husband. Who would have thought it? Funnily enough, the weird thing is when Bond is infiltrating Blofeld's lair and he's established this love story with Tracy, he actually sleeps with one of Blofeld's henchwomen. Actually, 2 of Blofeld's henchwomen. And then after he's done that, he goes back to the love story with Tracy. I can't explain it. I guess maybe Bond thought he doesn't love Tracy that much yet, so it's kind of okay to cheat here. I don't know, it was the bloody 60s, alright? I think Diana Rigg stands tall amongst all the Bond girls. She's got interest to her, she's got layers, she's got more of an emotional back and forth with James Bond. She's got more intrigue than a lot of the Bond women. She was kind of a revolutionary Bond girl in the fact that she brought Bond down to earth. He fell in love with her. It really is a love story, this movie, and it's fascinating to watch. And Diana Rigg is a very charismatic actress. She nails all the emotions she has to, the anger, the sadness, but she's also very fun in some moments, so you can see why Bond falls in love with her, because she's got everything, every emotion going for her. A weird thing about this movie is when Bond goes to infiltrate Blofeld's lair, Blofeld doesn't recognise him, even though Bond met him in You Only Live Twice. Like, literally, he met him.
You only live twice, Mr. Bond.
Now, the filmmakers say the excuse for this is On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the book, came before You Only Live Twice, so they are adapting that. Yeah, but we still saw in the last film that he had met him. You can't just ignore it and say, well, no, that's, we're following the book. Well, yeah, we saw on screen he met him. And another thing, Bond getting married to Tracy in this isn't mentioned in the next film either. I've seen more consistency in the Friday the 13th timeline. Telly Savalas as Blofeld is great. It's a great recast from Donald Pleasance. They felt Donald Pleasance wouldn't have been able to handle the more physical scenes in this, which might have been true. But I think that Telly Savalas is by far the second best Blofeld. I do like Christoph Waltz, Inspector, probably be my third best. But Telly Savalas, they had several actors to portray Blofeld who just weren't very good. But Telly Savalas was a great replacement for Donald Pleasance. And Telly Savalas was a wonderful actor, the Dirty Dozen in the 60s. He just really weird, creepy, underlying menace that he has. But in this, he mixes it with this suave charm. He's very charming in this. He's very unassuming. You could imagine people trusting him. And in this, he has a whole team of women who he's brainwashing, part of his cult, part of his plan to poison the world. He's got these women working for him who he brainwashes in these odd, dizzying scenes where he kind of speaks messages into their mind in the middle of the night. It was quite an ambitious plot, because we went on to see these sort of weird movies in the 70s that actually explored this. You weren't really seeing much of this stuff in the 60s, weird mind control cult stuff. So that stood out. And Blofeld was just so... You love watching him in this. You get swept up in his charm. Telly Savalas was such a great actor, but then he'll just throw in some just insane moments where you realise that Blofeld really is absolutely bonkers. As for the direction in this film, Peter R. Hunt, he gives it such a polished look. It's so sophisticated, this film. It's so extravagant. It's so classy. And the action scenes are wonderful. There's always that scene in the Bond films where Bond and his allies invade a lair and shoot it up, and that happens in this. But Peter Hunt gives it such a charm and extravagance and personality, and he shoots George Lazenby so cool. Makes him look so... He stands up to the other Bonds in the canon, the way he's presented on camera as such a superstar. And the action scenes where they invade the base, it's just so earned. It feels built up. Everything feels like well executed in this. And also the action scene with the bobsleigh is the ending action scene, where Bond is chasing Blofeld on a bobsleigh, and it's one of the best scenes in the James Bond series. And you really have to tip your hat to Peter Hunt in 1969, giving us what is one of the greatest action scenes in the Bond series. It really is. It's fast, the speed that you feel. Imagine being in the cinema in 1969. You get immersed in this. You are on that bobsleigh with James Bond, and you're really rooting for him because Blofeld always gets away, and you really feel like Bond is the underdog here. So you're like, come on, and the speed, the fast and furious nature, the exhilaration of this scene, the way Peter Hunt shoots you from inside the bobsleigh, is just phenomenal. It's so unique, it's so exciting, so thrilling. And it stands up to any action scene in the Bond series. I love it. So most people will probably know, but the people who don't, who plan to watch this movie, I'm about to reveal a big spoiler. You've probably heard of it. If you're willing to go through and, hear about it, you've probably heard about it. But if you don't want to and you're planning to watch this film, click off the video now. Everyone else knows what I'm talking about. It is the fact that James Bond gets married to Tracy at the end of this film. He's ready to throw everything away. He's genuinely in love with Tracy. He's throwing away that life. He wants to settle down with Tracy. You see the wedding, and then Blofeld drives past and his assassin shoots Tracy. Now, the director Peter Hunt said he put George Lazenby through the ringer with this scene. He wanted the performance so much, and he drained him. He drained Lazenby, kept making him do the performance. And Lazenby's not an actor, but his performance here stands up with any James Bond actor. By far. I don't know if Sean Connery could have played this scene. I genuinely don't. It's so vulnerable, it's so human, it's so sympathetic.
It's all right. It's quite all right, really. She's having a rest. We'll be going on soon. There's no hurry, you see. We have all the time in the world.
Modern reception to this movie has been very favourable, with film critic James Berardinelli calling it by far the best entry in the James Bond series, including some of the most exhilarating action sequences and a touching love story. Brian Fairbanks said that George Lazenby gives us a James Bond capable of vulnerability, a man who can show fear and is not immune to heartbreak, going on to call Lazenby's performance superb. Although Lazenby got a hard time back here, nowadays fellow Bonds Sean Connery, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton and Daniel Craig have rated his performance. George Lazenby is so underrated, and his performance as James Bond is getting a lot of repraise these days. If you haven't watched the film in years and you want to see if he's really as bad as people say, or if he's as good as people now say, watch On Her Majesty's Secret Service. It's one of the best James Bond films. In my next video, I am going to be ranking my number one of each of the Bond actors in order to try and reach my favourite James Bond movie of all time. And if you haven't seen my Bond rankings, click on the playlist on the screen now. Let me know what you think of On Her Majesty's Secret Service in the comments down below. Do you think it's underrated? Do you think it's overrated? Let me know what you think of George Lazenby, all that stuff. Thanks for watching everyone, and until next time, keep obsessing over movies.